May meeting of the 2018 meeting of the Southampton Village Zoning Board of Appeals is now open. We have two decisions that we're going to do right now, and we may have one later on also. 2995 Dinah Maxwell Smith, 90 Meeting House Lane.
I move we accept this decision as proposed.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
And number 3000, Shashin LLC, 1360 Middle Lane.
I move we accept this decision as proposed.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now,
Anyone here on 3,000? Okay.
we're going to be excused for a short while we meet with our attorney in executive session. Again.
Excuse us again.
All right, we're going to jump down here a bit. Jumping down to case 2996. Christopher and Jean
We want
Lynch.
to do 2978.
Yes, we do.
What?
2978.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yep, you got me.
I move we reopen 2978.
And just list what that is, DPB.
DPB Southampton LLC, 70 South Hill Street. Is there a second for that?
Second.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Now it's reopened.
I move that we accept a proposal by attorney for stipulations to this application, and it empowers the chairman and the council to act upon it.
I'll second that. Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Not too bad.
That's
Okay, now you go to Lynch.
Now we can go to 2996. Christopher and Jean Lynch, 58 Roscoe Drive. Got that file
You got the file, Jim.
Yeah, 298.
996.
there? Is John Bennett back there?
What is it?
No, it's his younger nephew, it looks like.
John Bennett.
I don't see it.
John Bennett here?
No, I guess he wasn't here.
I am the homeowner,
Yes.
and we were told that it was pending decision, so maybe he didn't.
You want to reopen it?
Was that communicated to him?
Yes, we wrote him a letter.
Oh, you did, okay. All right, well,
All right, so you're here, but there's no presentation to make? You have no presentation, right?
well, can you let us know why it's being reopened from pending?
Yes.
It was pending decision, and you're reopening.
It's
it.
We
It's
had
been
closed
reopened.
it, now we're going to reopen it. We had closed it, now we're going to reopen
Okay,
it. We
and
have
what
to
is
do
the
that
reason?
in order to hear some more information. Once we close it, we don't hear anything else. So
Right.
in order to hear more information, we have to reopen it.
So
Okay,
shall we
what
make a
information
motion
would you
now?
like?
One of the things we're looking for is that
So we
the house that's there now is going to be torn down, so it's going to be a clean slate.
Right.
So all we do is we have this one house with this one plan, with this one pool. Usually in a case like this, we say, well, you're not tied into that design or this particular structure. Maybe there's a way to reconfigure this on the property better that will give you a better house and be less of a, maybe not even need a variance. So other than what we have in front of us so far.
Okay, which, we came here last April 2017 to get a variance. We did exactly that, went to the ARB with a proposed solution that had been proposed for and approved for 4 years. And we went to them, I want to say 4 different times with various greenhouses, different proposals, getting all feedback, putting in all kinds of screening. And it was their proposal that we come back here to get this variance because of all the precedent on variances just like ours. And we presented everything that you see in the file. So we want more guidance as opposed to going on and on. It's been over a year and we're trying to,
We'd like to see a
Work
plan
something
that
out.
would require a little less as far as the variance goes.
okay, so
As
the
Dan
step,
just said, you have a clear slate here. You have a blank piece of property once you tear down the building.
Right.
So you could do something a little different than what you've already proposed.
The feedback we got is that you were putting an extension on the side of the house that was like 5 feet by certain feet long, so that the pool would be down in the backyard. But
Right.
we're saying is that that's the only thing that we know. You could reconfigure that where nobody's happy with the 5-foot, 16-foot long little extension to make the pool legal in the backyard. We'd like to see some alternate site plan showing where maybe you'd have a viable room you'd put on that side, where maybe you put the pool in the opposite direction, and you just redesign the house. And then you could have a library there, or a media room, or a den, or another bedroom, instead of a 5-foot hallway to nowhere. We want to explore that a little bit before.
Something that's not so radical as that.
They would like several designs.
New proposals.
New proposals to show that Village Law, Section 7712B says that the variance should be the minimal variance required. So they would like to see some variations of house design with the pool that you can show this board that it may be a way to design what you want to get a dwelling out of this and also lessen the impact of the variance for the pool, or maybe avoid it altogether. We don't know. So that's the request. If John was here, that's what we would communicated to him.
Okay.
And we'll communicate that to you. And then if you'll come back, it'll be adjourned and it'll come back at a future time. Let us know to hear it. And by the way, for those who are interested, I'm sitting in on this application because Mr. Bruin has a conflict. So I've handled this before in front of this board and the ARB and will continue to do so.
Okay, thank you. One quick question, more to save time when we go back with
You may
new
want to
proposals.
stand up here and help us.
It's just whether or not an accessory structure would be okay. We know we would need a variance for that, but if the house is the same and we just have a break and something that shields the pool from that one street, is that something that we should put as
Like
one
a
of the
pool
proposals?
house?
Yeah.
Well,
But
it still would leave the pool in a required front yard by doing it that way. So we're trying to, if you have to show us, maybe that's one of the proposals
Okay,
we
we'll
bring back.
come up-
The board doesn't want to say no, but it doesn't sound like that would be high on the list of
Okay.
preferences.
Okay, thank you.
So I
Adjourn.
motion to adjourn this for all purposes.
But, so
I
moved.
didn't reopen it
Sorry, you have a comment, public comment?
Did we open it yet?
yet?
Have a reopen.
We got some comments from the public. We have to reopen it first.
I move we reopen 2996 Christopher
second.
Jean Leach.
All in favor? Aye. And now it's reopened officially. Now we can take some comments from the floor.
Mr. Chairman, board members, my name is Fred Weinfurt, 45 Roscoe Drive. I'm at a bit of a loss that the applicant doesn't have any idea why this is being reopened. First off, I would think that they would be the ones that would be requesting changing the proposed dwelling, that it looks like, I don't want to, well, my reaction is the board is consulting with them, telling them how to approach this. That's my read.
We avoided that right there. When
We didn't do that.
This is an administrative board, sir. It's not an adversarial proceeding.
Okay, well, that's my reaction. Let me just say that. But I also know that this matter was closed previously, and on April 17th, there was a work session, at which time a vote was taken concerning the variance that was requested, and in a 3-to-1 vote, the variance request was denied. And I don't know why, after almost 5+ weeks, that decision hasn't been drafted and this acted upon appropriately. I don't know why this is just being
If you look around
extended.
in Roscoe Drive, you'll find that the great majority of homes on the same size lot have swimming pools.
Oh, sure,
It's an area loaded with swimming pools.
I know that.
So we're trying to figure some way here
But not in
that
front yards.
they can get a pool with less variance or no variance.
But as proposed, as the application was presented to you, isn't that what you're supposed to act upon and render a decision rather than
Now
leaving?
we're asking them to come back with a new application, which we're entitled to do.
Oh, they can, yes, I understand they can submit a new application, but
That's
what?
what we're waiting to see.
And it isn't appropriate to deny this one when we had a vote 3-1 against.
There was never any official public vote.
It was a work session, work session, of which the public
There
was,
was no
No
official,
vote at a work session.
no official, but there might have been a consensus, but there was no motion.
A vote has to be taken at this meeting, not at a work session.
because it was 3-1 against at the
Yeah.
work session.
What's your point?
At the work session, then why even take the vote at the work session? I'm
There was no
didn't
vote
take
at the
a
work
vote.
Didn't
session.
take a vote.
There's no vote.
Trying
We
to get a
expressed our
feeling.
feelings,
Trying to
is
get a
what we do
feeling
at
of
a work
things,
session.
So our council can write a decision for us.
What has transpired since?
He has to know how we feel.
Be over there.
What?
Well,
Guy, you typing up without.
yeah, I'm confused with how this is being handled.
Here's where it stands now. They're going to come back to us with another plan. That's where it's going to go.
Okay. So so they have to submit a new application?
Yeah,
New application?
yeah.
Not a new application, new
Not a new
plan.
application, but it's going to be a new plan. We're asking them for a plan that's not the same as it
There
is
could
now.
be several different plans, so we want to see, not just one, we would like to see if there's a way that this can get designed that would not have as large a variance needed or no variance needed, by repositioning the pool, repositioning the house, changing the house size, changing the house design. We don't know that. We only had the one, so if we want to see if that's possible, and that the owner can get a house that they would be more pleased with, get a pool that would be in the backyard, and they might not even need a variance. So then your point is moot. They could just get a building permit.
Okay, because I know there's a window within which a decision has to be made, and I don't know, how long do you continue to keep it open for revision of plans, revision of plans, revision of plans without denying the application and starting from scratch? How long do you keep that open?
We've had applications here for a year or more,
Definitely.
indefinitely.
So we're satisfied.
Mayor French?
All right, thank you.
Yes, please.
I have one basic question, okay?
What's your name?
Robert Smith, 5 Adams Lane. From the time that this board at the work session, okay, gave its opinion as to how the decision was going to be rendered, and advised council to write a decision, okay? What has come to your attention to reopen this matter?
Mr. Smith, the board is not here to answer questions.
I'm just asking a question. What has
Like I said,
happened?
the board is not here to answer questions. The board is here to receive your statements. If you'd like to make a statement, you're more than welcome to.
I'm asking a question.
The board is not here to respond to questions.
Did council, okay, involve you in any way during your executive session on this matter?
Is that a question?
Involve us in any way?
That's
Yeah.
a question.
We're always involved with our council.
Sounds like a question.
Listen to his advice, if he gives any.
Did he ask you to reopen this?
Did you ask us to reopen this?
He did not.
No.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I know from my own opinion, I've looked at the number of pools in Roscoe Drive on the same size lots, and I've changed my opinion. But I don't like the particular plan that's before us now. I certainly
it's in
don't
the
like
front
that
yard.
alleyway thing that they were thinking of building. So I'd like to see them come in with something that's a little bit more conforming as far as the pool goes. And maybe they don't need a variance, maybe they need a smaller variance. That's what we're looking for.
They spent 16 months, okay? They spent 6 months at the Architectural Review Board changing plans. The whole purpose of going there was to get around having a variance.
Different board, different perspectives.
I
This is not
understand.
the ERB.
Then they came back here saying, hey, we're not going to give them the extension, so they need a variance.
They came back with this thing with this alleyway that's 5 foot wide, which, that's radical.
I know, that's exactly what took place, okay, 10 years ago.
We're hoping they don't come back with that. We're hoping they come back with something that's better than that.
They could build that without a variance. And we're saying, rather than build that without a variance, why don't we look at a better design? So we're giving the owner an opportunity to make a better house.
The point is that they
have a
can't
pool
build
that's
that,
more
okay?
compliant to the neighborhood.
They've been rejected, okay, by the Architectural Review Board.
No, they have
It
not been
takes a little
rejected,
while.
sir.
It's not an easy case. It's got 3 front yards. It takes more work than a normal yard with 1 front yard. So that's, we're doing our due diligence here.
Okay. So what's the next step? How do we know what's going on?
Well, it'll be advertised when they're ready to come in again.
It'll be on the agenda. All you need to do is call up the building department and ask if they've received any plans.
And don't you feel that August 1st, given that there's a change in zoning, that you should require a new application on a new building?
Is that a question?
It's up to the applicant.
To the applicant. And we told them what we wanted, what we're hoping for.
Okay,
We'll see what
thank you.
they give us when they give it to us. Is there anybody else who'd like to hear of this application? Good. Thanks. I move we adjourn this for all purposes.
A second?
All in favor? Second. Okay. Now we're down to you, Chick, is that right?
Yes, do you want to look at 2999?
Yes. Case number 2999, FHW Limited Partnership, 111, 137 to 153 Pond Lane. Do you have,
I have a draft decision for your consideration. This is the one with the revegetation and management of invasive species within the 125-foot setback along the west side of Pond Lane. And it also included installation of a rain garden. We had asked the applicant to meet with the highway superintendent and to address the village board. And my understanding is that that has been done. I have spoken to Gary Gillespie. He reviewed the plan, made a couple of recommendations, and that was incorporated into a revised plan. And they are proceeding with the steps that they would need to do work within the village right-of-way. Mr. Bruin has been involved in this. He's not here, but is also aware of that information and did sit at the village board meeting when it came up. So the conditions do include the steps that we feel would be necessary. It's not unlike what we did with Gin Lane when there was work within the right-of-way. So it talks about insurance requirements and village authorization. Talks about construction management because it is along a roadside and within the village right-of-way. And all of those additional conditions, as well as recognition of the plan as submitted and the standard conditions with respect to hours of operation and things like that. So you have that as a draft for your consideration. And I think, were we trying to determine if the hearing was previously closed or not?
no, it was adjourned to all purposes.
Okay.
So we can see if there's anyone who'd like to speak to this application, and then we can close it and give you a decision. Is there anyone who'd like to be heard of this application?
On a note, though, we just did our continuing training that we do each year for
Yes.
being a board member. They talked, one of the topics were the positive effects of these rain gardens, and as far as the culverts that they would use and highways and stuff as being, well, they're beautiful, they're effective, and they seem to be a coming trend.
It has been a trend in many parts of the country. I'm pleased to say that we've been involved with many installations, very successful, and I think we're going to see a lot more. It's known as green infrastructure, and it will definitely treat and manage the first flush of pollutants and improve water quality overall, both surface water and groundwater.
So we don't have anybody who'd like to be heard of this application, therefore I'm going to move that we close the application. Can I have a second on that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And will you give us a motion to accept the decision?
I move that we accept the decision on 2999.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
That's also approved.
Everything's we got to do Beechwood yet.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
What's your staying for Beechwood?
If that's the last one on, I don't think there's any new cases at all.
No new
We
cases
beat you
whatsoever.
45 minutes,
That's okay.
30.
I wish you all a good
We're almost at the point where we were years and years ago, we didn't have anything
Yeah.
at the end of one meeting.
Yep. That'd be okay, too?
It's a rare thing.
It is. Well, have a good evening.
All right, Chick, take care.
Thank you.
The Beechwood file.
At the Beechwood, Mom.
2997. Coming your way.
Oh, Jesus. Bud.
Good thing I went to the gym today.
Good evening. For the applicant, David Gilmartin Jr., Farrell Fritz, 50 Station Road, Watermill, New York. I handed forward a chart that shows what our new proposal has we've updated the chart that we've been showing you all along to include our the new plan. So since our last public hearing, there have been a couple of developments. At the end of the public hearing, Mr. Dubb offered to reduce the project by 3 units. That number was specifically chosen because the Southampton Association had put in a letter requesting that, and then the testimony from Whitefield also indicated that they would like to see less density on that back building. So that's where that offer came from. We made those changes, submitted a new site plan. We submitted in time for your work session, so I think you've had the opportunity to review that. The second development is there's a letter in your file from the Southampton Association that withdraws any objection they have. We've had some conversations with Whitefield, and I'm happy to report that they're also going to withdraw their objection. I know Mr. Fife can speak for himself quite eloquently, but we did have a conversation. They have 2 conditions that they would agree to withdraw their objection on. The first is that there be no structures permitted in the side yard, and secondly, that there be a maintenance plan for the landscaping and the fences, and Beechwood would have no objection if that were the condition of an approval from this board if we were to get one. So the changes in the plan are pretty clear. They happen in the back. The black building goes from 6 lots to 3 lots. The structures then move east off the Whitefield lot line from 35 feet, which had existed now to 53 feet. Also, the FAR was reduced from 68,250, and that was our the last iteration of the application, of the one that we had last month, and it's now down to 61,375. I've also put the site plan from our first application, and it's also the one that the planning board went through the secret process on, gave us a neg deck, and issued a finding statement. So over the past 8 months that we've been before you, there have been some significant changes. Number one, the Terry Cottage has been removed from the project. It'll be developed as a single lot. We're still in the process of trying to determine whether it's going to be part of the condo plan or not. So as you see what we've handed up, that includes both with the Terry Cottage and without. And the thought process behind including the Terry Cottage was that it's going to be, or it might be part of the condo structure. Second of all, inclusive of the Terry Cottages, we reduced the number of units from 24 to 20. We've withdrawn any requests from side yard setbacks, so all of the structures meet the side yard setbacks. Significantly, and in response to the community, you can see the latch building was moved up significantly towards the street. Based on input from the community, we've kept that, and it will remain in its current place. So the historic nature, historic background of that property will remain exactly as it is today. The garages and motor court from the original plan have been removed. The pool and clubhouse were moved. The theory behind that was, again, a response to Whitefield. Originally, it was in this area. One of the iterations moved it to this area. There was an objection, so we moved it to the back of the lot. And what's significant here is that this is the village water recharge area, so there'll be no impact to anybody to the east there. And then finally, again, our FAR from, again, the original application, the FAR was 101,634 square feet. That's been reduced on this plan to 61,375. And I think it's important to note here, again, the original plan was a plan on which the planning board gave us a negative deck under SECRA and put out a finding statement. In that finding statement, on the larger, more intense development, I'll call it, the planning board found that it was consistent with the character of the community, that the change would be beneficial for the neighborhood, which is an important determination because that's what you're looking at tonight. Does it change from one non-conforming use to another? Is that beneficial for the neighborhood? One of the significant things that I'll talk about in depth a little bit more is the upgrade in the infrastructure. And then one of the biggest determinations, at least in our mind, that they made with the density is compatible with other multifamily units or projects in the area. The plans changed significantly, and we think that the planning board and its determinations, if those were correct, that this far exceeds that and lessens the impact significantly. In fact, we would argue that there's really very little impact. If you look from Hill Street, looking this way, Hill Street, you have the structures that we're proposing are set back significantly from Hill Street and then are fully screened by the Village Latch Building and the Terry Cottage. To our east is the Southampton Inn. They have a tennis court and swimming pool that buffers, and we meet the setback there. We've talked a lot about the setbacks from Whitefield here, and now we're set back even further. So this plan has significantly reduced, and I would say negated any impact to any of the neighbors. It won't be seen from the street. You're going to have that historic look that you've always had with the Terry Cottage and with the Village Latch Building. Based on the reduction, we would say that the change of use is not substantial here. And substantiality is something that's been sort of bandied about in the discussion on this application. And I think one thing that you have to remember when you're considering substantiality, it's the totality of the circumstances. So you just can't look at the percentage of deviation from the code. You have to look at the totality of the circumstances that surround the application. Here, the totality of the circumstances, that surround this application is that we're eliminating an illegal overuse of the property. We're incorporating adequate infrastructure. If you think, I had a conversation with my dad about this application. He's 81 years old. He grew up on Herrick Road and he walked to Sacred Hearts every day. These buildings were there. They have not been improved or upgraded since he was in the 5th grade. That's as far back as he could remember. So imagine the infrastructure that exists today on site there. And then, on the other hand, consider the improvements that we're doing. Innovative, alternative wastewater treatment system. So this is the upgrade that all of the municipalities are looking for. We agreed to do that voluntarily during the SECRA process. Secondly, we are going to capture all the stormwater runoff. None of the stormwater runoff is captured today, and we will capture 100% of that. It's a use that's compatible. We're going from a non-conforming use, which is commercial, to a more conforming use, which is residential. And the way that we have designed the site is that it's a little more intense on our eastern side, which our neighbor is a 90-unit operating inn. And then on our western side, it's less intense. Again, we've stepped that building back in deference to our neighbors at Whitefield. So it's a better use, and even within the site, I think we've designed it as a better use. We'll provide permanent patrons for village businesses. It'll enhance property values, and almost as important, I think, is the environmental impacts, which I think is something that you really have to consider here, is the maintenance of the Terry Cottage and the Village Latch building, so that historic view there will remain much in the same way it was when my 81-year-old father in the 5th grade walked past it. So again, I think those are the two things that I'd really like to stress and have you guys remember when you're considering this application is the, what's more than significant in an environmental upgrade. I mean, there's no environmental restrictions on this now. It's horrible, and it will be, a state-of-the-art environmental used piece of property. And then secondly, again, if I can leave you with another thought, is the the retention of the historic nature of the site. Overall, we submit that we've provided overwhelming testimony that this is a beneficial change, the change from the inn to the multifamily use. And we've provided significant evidence. We can answer any questions, but we request that you close the hearing tonight and give us a decision, and we respectfully ask that you grant it.
Here would be my question. Is anybody else? So, here's my question, because you brought up the idea of the substantial variance, which is one of the criterion. Recently, the village reduced the gross floor area. The trustees voted to reduce the gross floor area on every property of the village by 2%, because the trustees saw this as a way to accomplish the overall goals of the village, reduce density. In this case, we're going from approximately 25,000 to 26,000 square feet. That's what's currently there. What's allowed is about 25,000 square feet, but we're increasing this, or you're requesting that we increase the gross floor area to 61,000 square feet. So that's more than...
Right. We've had this conversation.
Twice.
We've had this
Right.
conversation a lot.
So, yeah, the question is, how is that not substantial?
Well, again, substantial is about totality of the circumstances. You're doing a purely numerical analysis, and the courts respectfully have said that's not the analysis that you should undertake. You have to look at totality of the circumstances. And again, respectfully, I think you're going down the wrong road comparing it to an R20.
No, I'm not. I'm comparing it to also what is there now.
Well,
not
I
the
think-
R20.
well-
I said what is there now. What is there now is 25,815 square feet.
The numbers that I have, the latch is 33,828 square feet. I don't know if that matters to you. And then the Terry Cottage is 9,383. But again, I think we're...
Well, what I looked at was the Bishop's Pond, which were 69 units. The average size was less than 3,000 square feet per unit. On this one, it's a smaller, it's closer to the heart of the village. It's a smaller piece of property, and we've jumped up the square footage to almost 3,600 square feet per unit. And the board's feeling that maybe that the sizes, we're not against the project, but the size of these units might still be just a little bit too large. Isn't that pretty much what's...
These are 3,100 square foot units, and I'll ask Mr. Dubb to come up, and he can confirm this. My understanding is they're 3,100 square foot habitable space
I'm
units.
just going off the
And
chart that you gave me.
Just let me finish. The garage is what I think pushes it up to that number, but the habitable space is 3,100 square feet. Stephen, they can confirm, yeah. So I think that's the difference here. And again, coming back, you're using an R20 standard that if the Board of Trustees intended that you take a non-conforming use and only make it conforming, then you would use the R20 standard, but that's not what they chose to do. They chose to give you the option, and we've had this discussion, and I've thought a lot about how to describe this in a better way. And I guess, what I came up with is I litigated a case in the town. It was a zoning board case. It was about a tennis court. The tennis court was located 17 feet off the street from the property line. Neighbor across we get it approved. Neighbor across the street says, I'm going to appeal it. Appeals it to Supreme Court. We prevailed there. Then went to the second department, the Appellate Division Second Department, and we argued it there. And their decision says, and I think this is the way that you need to look at the substantiality part of the test. And again, I don't agree that it's substantial based on the change and all the benefits, so everything surrounding it. But even in your mind, if you think it's substantial, here's what the Appellate Division said about it. While we agree with the petitioner, who's the neighbor that sued us, that the proposed variances were substantial and that the alleged difficulty was self-created, there was no evidence that the granting of the variance would produce an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood, have an adverse effect on physical and environmental conditions, or otherwise result in a detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood or community. That's exactly what's happening here. So you can't just get caught up in the numbers. You got to consider the whole application and what's happening. And again, I come back to the two big important points. It's the environmental change and it's the retention of the historic structures. In a pure R20 application, that's a subdivision, you're not retaining those two buildings. It can't happen.
Can I speak to the square footage?
Sure.
So,
Let me ask you a question. According to when you did Bishop's Pond, the 2,900 square foot, did those buildings have garages? That 29 include the garage?
It did.
So it's still
Hi, Stephen Dubb from
500-600
Beechwood.
square feet larger per unit.
Could you give us your name again, please?
Stephen Dubb from Beechwood. Bishop's Pond was a lot denser, and it also included a lot of flats, so one unit over one unit, and those were smaller. So if you look at the enclave, which was just townhomes, with the exception of two flats, the average square footage, including garages, is 3,290. And the 3,452 number that you're looking at for the Village Lash proposal, that includes garages and porches. So when you take that out, we're at about 3,122 square feet on average for living space. The 3,577 that you're looking at, that includes a Terry Cottage. Terry Cottage is a large existing home, so that sort of skews us. And then I would also point out that compared to our FAR, including the Terry Cottage, is at 18%, compared to Cooper's Farm, which is 18.82%, so we're less. Our proposed, including the Terry Cottage, we're at 3.8 homes per acre. Cooper's Farm was 4.3 homes per acre. And Cooper's Farm, including garages, is 3,300 square feet on average.
The problem I have with your comparison to Cooper's Farm and to other projects is that they were in different zoning districts. So you're basically assuming a different zoning district, that you're not in R20 and that you're in some other zoning district. And that's why those comparisons, when you're comparing it to projects that were in a different zoning district, I always thought you should be substantially less in your variance request than those, because those projects accomplished a zoning change or were in a different zoning district, whereas you've opted not to apply for a rezoning of the area.
Well, I'll let Rooney speak to that, but I think that the overall theme of it is we're saying the underlying R20 zoning isn't appropriate for this parcel, given the neighbors on either side to the north and the south. And if not, what is appropriate? Some sort of higher density, transitory transition use. And so, okay, what are the transition uses in the village? Similar condominium communities, and we're comparing ourselves to those. And I know you've explained why we went this route, but maybe you can answer that a little more fully.
First of all, I think that Cooper's Farm and the Irving were both R20 zoned because they are on either end of our lots. So I think they were R20 zoned, and they're still located in R20 zone. And again, the reason we didn't go for a zone change, and remember, we're at this about 3 years. We spent 2 years in the secret process and then 8 months here, is at the time, Mark Epley was the mayor. George Benedict at the time was a partner in this. I personally met with village officials with that specific question and said, how would you like us to proceed? Our ability to develop this in a more intense way was, certainly in hindsight, was more possible going to the village board, because if you look at that MFPRD, they gave you 6 units per acre. We're at about 4 now. So, and our original application was less than 5, so we could have achieved more density doing it. But I'm not sure if you remember the Bishop's Pond, but we were criticized pretty significantly because of that relationship, and we came to this board to get approval on that. We didn't go with an MFPRD, and we're subject to a lot of approval. I can't imagine what would have happened if we had proceeded to the village board and George were still a part of the application and Mark was still the mayor. That it wasn't possible. We got specific guidance. This is the process that we were told to go on. We've invested, as you know, and as you've heard Mr. Dubb say, we've invested heavily in this process. We're committed to this, and we want to see it to its conclusion. One of the last things that I would ask you to do is look at the prior decisions that we've got for Bishop's Pond. There were 2, because remember we came back with the Squires Pearson piece, and there were significant, numerical variances associated with that, and your decision during that said that what you're doing, the improvements, simply overcome that. So it was the totality of the circumstances that carried the day in that. I think that answers the questions. There were a couple in between, so I hope I've gotten, all of it. But again, I think the evidence is overwhelming that this is a benefit, and it's not substantial based on its use and based on its location.
Square footage.
Well, that's the question. I mean, we're in agreement on many of the things that you're saying. Our concern is that you have too much square footage, that is substantial. So, I guess the question is, do you want to consider reducing the square footage from 61,000 since it's more than double what you have right now? And I agree, all of the environmental benefits are appreciated, et cetera, but does that justify more than doubling the current square footage?
Well, let me a couple of points. First of all, during the secret process, the planning board looked at that. They, on 2 or 3 different points in either DEIS, FEIS, or the finding statement, say that the property is underutilized. So I don't think it's a fair comparison to say what you have now and you're increasing it, right? You could have a lot, that you have a provision that you can expand structures on a lot. Say you have 2 houses and they're on 10 acres, but they're 800 square feet apiece, right? You say, well, I'd like to increase those to 2,000 each. Your code says you can only increase it by 50%, right? So it's what you're starting with, right? So you have small houses, the 2 small houses, 800. You ask to more than double the size, you have to come and get a variance to do that. So what you're starting with, I don't think is fair to make the comparison. So on a lot that's underutilized, I think you have to take that into account. We started this process long before we went to the planning board. We went to the Southampton Association and said, we're thinking about doing this. Can we get your support? And I met with J.D. Singh, and he brought one of his board members, and they said to me, look, we don't want units the size of the ones that you have at Bishop Pond. We want larger units. These are people that are going to transition from the estate section to this. So please build bigger units. Well, we go through this process, and we are where we are, but I think the market out there is looking for a bigger unit. The final thing I'd say is, what's a fair comparison? You've asked us to go out, and you've asked us to look at people with similar projects, similar properties, and we've done that, and we are right smack dab in the middle of that. So, you know, I certainly am not going to answer for Mr. Dubb, but, you know, I think we are where we are.
Well, you also testified on Bishop's Pond, which are smaller units, that they've sold every one of them, and they're reselling them for higher than what they originally sold them for, and the market's still strong on them. So I can understand your argument if you're saying that, well, these things aren't selling because they're small and nobody wants them. It appears that everybody wants them.
Well, I mean, with all due respect, I think it's a completely different product in a completely different place for a different consumer. And you know, the marketing part of this, I think we're getting a little bit, you know, off the in the weeds a little. But I think it's a completely different consumer. But again, that's not my expertise.
Or you'd like us to close this month and have a decision next month? Is that what you'd like?
That's what we're looking for.
You have anybody else that'd like to speak from your team? Are they all set?
Unless somebody wants to say something, I think I'm it.
Do we have anybody from the audience who'd like to speak?
Good evening, members of the board, Mr. Robinson, Patrick Fife, Toomey, Latham, Shea, Kelly, Dubin, and Quartararo. Here again on behalf of Whitefield Condominium. Happy to report I do come in peace, and that my intent is to be rather brief. Whitefield's feeling is that changes that were made are acceptable and address the objections that we made, provided that certain conditions are met with respect to any approval. I've got I gave a copy to Mr. Gilmartin already, but just a short letter that has kind of the items that I've already discussed with Mr. Gilmartin that we would like to see as part of any approval. And there are conditions that we want to see reflected in a covenant and restriction that would be recorded and run with the land, and also preferably be for the benefit not only of the village, but Whitefield as an adjacent property owner. And
They say that's okay with them?
I don't think we discussed that. In terms of a covenant, yes. I know, I don't believe there was any objection to reflecting this in a covenant, whether it's a covenant that comes about as part of the planning board process, but simply that an approval would be conditioned upon a covenant ultimately being recorded against the property. And the items that we would like to see addressed were first that the number of units not exceed 19 on the Village Latch property.
Agreed to that already.
Right, which is being proposed. And I did just, I know board member Davini had a question about whether there was a covenant and declaration on Whitefield's property, and there was. I just wanted to, for the record, to close the loop on that, provided. And it did restrict specifically the number of units at Whitefield to 29. So just to the extent that there's precedent regarding applying a covenant in a situation like this, I know that was before the trustees, but it was 1979, but there's precedent for having a covenant and restriction regarding the number of units and other items in connection with a change like this. The other items that we wanted to see addressed are pretty straightforward. The applicant had proposed, and we'd like to see a 6-foot-high fence running along the property line, and the covenant that it would be installed and maintained. Same thing with respect to the landscaping. The applicant provided a conceptual boundary planting plan as part of the most recent submission, and we wanted to see a covenant that would require the installation of that and the ongoing maintenance, and then just a restriction prohibiting the installation of structures, patios, decks, et cetera, in the 35-foot side yard setback, which isn't, again, it's not shown on the applicant's plans, and it's something that we've discussed with the applicant, so I don't believe there's any objection with that. That being said, that's Whitefield's position. One point, though, that was raised, to the extent that there would, I guess, less square footage would mean more units. I think Whitefield is not in favor of that. we would not like to see any more units on this property. I think the number.
You said 19.
Right, no, but in terms of the questions that were raised earlier, and I think Mr. Herman, who's one of the board members from Whitefield, is here tonight. He wanted to say a minute or two on that as well. But that's really Whitefield's position, and we appreciate the board's
If it
time.
gets approved for 19 units, that's going to be 19 units. It's not going to be
Right.
20 units or 21. It's going to be 19 units.
I guess just to the extent that based on the comments tonight, there was some, I guess, revision of the plan, and it doesn't sound like there would be, that would come back at a lesser square footage and more units. That's just not.
Question about
Okay.
more units?
I haven't heard that at all.
Okay, well, no, I just wanted to make clear that was, our concern was based on the current size of the
Number
units.
is 19.
Okay, then that Whitefield, with the acceptance of those conditions in a covenant, Whitefield would not have any objection to the plan as it was presented to the zoning board. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak?
On behalf of the Board of Whitefields, we do appreciate everything that's been
We
done.
have your name, sir.
Paul Herman. Everything that's been done, they've satisfied us in a lot of ways. The covenants are very, very important to us because, as we know, bylaws in a condominium are not always followed, so we'd like the power of the village behind us on that. And Bishop's Pond was brought up. We are just hoping that this is a more high-scale development than Bishop's Pond. And Mr. Dubs and I shook hands that we're going to have a dialogue in terms of the construction process and to be good neighbors. So just wanted to be.
Is there anybody else who wants to speak?
Michael Dubb. I just want to address what was just said and also address your concern, Mr. Guzowitz. In terms of Bishop's Pond, it's a different neighborhood and different place. The land acquisition here, as opposed to what Bishop's Pond was, is over 10 times the number, hence a different type of product. I can't build Bishop's Pond there. I don't want to build Bishop's Pond there. I want to build something compatible with the area and something that, will be received well by the community. So I obviously, as I do before all these hearings, I visit the Latch site and I also visit Whitefield. And all I can say at this point is we're 3 years into the process. We want to do something that's really good. I've never done anything that's left any town in worse shape, only better shape. I look at the beautiful structure of Whitefield. I looked at the work that the Whitefield community is putting in to their community as we talk, what they're doing to the facades of their homes. You got a beautiful, spectacular structure at the entrance to Whitefield. You have 2 rotting hulks at the Village Latch site. It's a bit of a blight on the community, and I only want to fix it. I want to build what will be well received. It's walkable, it's smart growth, it's all the environmental, issues that that people are concerned with, and I respectfully ask that you let us get on with the process.
You okay with the stipulations that we just got from Mr.
I'll address those I'll address those in a minute.
You see, the most dangerous place in this room is between me and Mike. He cut me off at the pass. So I'll back off. Thank you.
Just one point on the square footage. The 61,000 square feet that you're looking at is the worst-case scenario. If you remember, we presented 3 different options for townhome floor plans, and when calculating the 61,000, and those were all slightly different square footages. Master down, for example, is less square footage than the master bedroom on the second floor model is. But for the purposes of calculating the square footage, we took the largest of those 3 models. So you're looking at the worst case scenario, and in all likelihood, purchasers are going to want master bedrooms on the first floor, so you'd likely end up with less square footage than what you see there. And I just want to make sure I'm reading the room the right way. You don't want more units. Okay.
You got that?
All right, just quickly, part of what you have to do is a balancing test, and I think this answers it, and you're asking us if we want to reduce square footage. So there's a benefit to the applicant, and Mr. Dove spoke eloquently to the people that we hope would buy here. And say, what's the detriment? If you want to reduce it from the roughly 61,000 square feet, what benefit? To what benefit are you achieving by doing that? And I go back to, you're not going to be able to see these units from here. The Latch Building and the Terry Cottage are going to end up smaller because there were some additions to those that are not historical in nature. So they're going to end up smaller. But they completely screen what's going on behind it. So nobody from Hill Street's going to see it. So no reduction's going to help any passersby. We are set back pretty significantly from the main action at the Southampton Inn. No reduction's going to benefit them. A reduction in these units isn't going to benefit Whitefield. Again, we're set back pretty far. So the benefit is enormous to Beechwood for having, a decent-sized square footage and a product that people are going to want. And I don't think there's a lot of detriment to the neighborhood by reducing it 3, 5, 10. I mean, I don't know what the feeling is, but there's no detriment today. So what the reduction is not going to be
Again, do you agree to the stipulations as proposed by I like it.
Yes, just with one caveat, and I said that in the beginning. One caveat is that the planning board during the site plan processes will probably have an extensive covenant. So we don't want to covenant now and redo the work. Again, we wouldn't object to what they've requested as conditions to a decision that we're bound by, but we'd like to do one covenant.
When we write the decision, we're probably going to put these conditions in there.
Yeah, that's fine. We don't object to the covenant. It's your requirement to file a covenant that we have now I would say big issue, but I'd rather do one covenant during the site plan process, which...
Well, if you already have it from us, why do you need it from the planning board also?
Because they're going to have their own covenant requirements when we go through that process. So we would just add those in, have one covenant that governs the property. It's just a procedural timing type of thing. And if it's in the condition, there's no way
But
that...
in general, you accept.
Yes, absolutely. And we'd ask you to close it, but have the opportunity to put in written submissions prior to your work session date.
Kind of written submission.
I don't know. We're going to... I know that there's some things are going to come up, and we'll write you a letter.
Have it in before the work date?
Before the work session.
2 weeks.
Whenever the work session is, if we can submit it before the work session.
Okay, all right.
I did want to respond to one thing you said about, because you were responding to the idea that, what if we reduce the gross floor area a little bit? What does it matter? And what I'm wrestling with, as much as I like some of the things that you're accomplishing here, is why does the village say on every other lot that we need to reduce the gross floor area by 2%? Didn't matter whether or not it was a house that you could see from the road. They were talking about houses on, 1 acre, 2 acres. They were talking about houses at the end of cul-de-sacs. Every house in the village, every property in the village was reduced by just 2%. And the village trustees thought that that was a helpful reduction. And here, to respond to your question, it's the same issue. So we're asking for a reduction in the gross floor area because one of the circumstances that is part of this totality, for me, is that the village is very concerned about gross floor area. So I'm trying to incorporate that general feeling in the village that we're confronting some overcrowding, some excessive density throughout the village. So yes, 2% apparently matters to the village and to the trustees, and yes, it would matter here as well. And I'm not saying 2% was the number we were looking for, but we were looking for a reduction in gross floor area from what's proposed.
So that happened in residential zoning districts, right? Where you have a lot, you're building a house, and you're looking right at the house as it gets built, and the village wants those structures to be 2% small. And I don't think that's coming into effect until August 1st, if I'm not mistaken. But again, I come back to, nobody's going to see this, right? It's not going to impact anybody, and that comes back to your balancing, right? I assume, although I don't know that they'll have much success, but people who are subject to the new restrictions will have to come to you for variance, right? That's what you do when the code doesn't meet your needs. You come and you ask for a variance, right? So I understand that the trend is to less impactful structures, and I'm saying you're getting something that's less impactful, and the trade-off is you're getting rid of a non-conforming use, which your code instructs you to do. It tells you get rid of non-conforming uses, get more towards conformity, and that's what this does. And there's a trade-off in that, and that's the trade-off, and that's the again, come back to the balancing test.
I think that what impelled the board to decrease the GFA was that prior to turning that around, the structures were an affront to the street. They were an affront to the neighbors in residential areas. This is not an affront.
Good. Well said.
Is there anybody else who'd like to be heard? Bo, did you have anything you'd like to add to this?
No, but Wayne has joined us, so I don't know what his recommendation
Wayne
would
have
be.
anything to add?
No, but I'm sure I'll review the tapes and share notes with Bo and all the board members, but I do, just one question I would ask. Was there a presentation earlier about what the planning board found not to have an impact on the environment or a detriment to the neighborhood, and what the changes have been that have been as a result of this board's inquiry? Was
yes.
that,
Yeah, we went through
if that
this.
was the case, then I don't need to have any further information.
What's the feeling of the board? Close this for decision?
I move we close it for decision.
All in favor?
Written comment period?
Only subject to the written comments, any written
Prior
comments.
to the work session.
Submitted prior to the
Yeah.
work session.
Oh, the work session was,
That's
I
by
think, was the
any
19th.
Okay.
Any part.
Yes.
All in favor?
Thank you.
That's it, I believe. Anything else on the agenda? No. And I have a motion to close the May 2018 meeting of the Southampton Village Zoning Board of Appeals. All in favor? Aye.